Premier Steven Miles, welcome to 7:30.
Good evening, Laura.
You said this morning that obviously rescues were the immediate priority. What's the assessment of whether there are still many people needing to be rescued from rooftops and other stranded locations?
We've seen further rescues throughout the day, both by helicopter in Dagara and by boat. There are areas that are still inaccessible, and so as soon as we can get aircraft in to places like Woodthorpe, we'll evacuate everyone from there. But they made an attempt to evacuate them by helicopter today and had to turn back. Luckily, one of the helicopters was able to do some other evacuations from another town nearby. So there's still a lot of activity on the ground.
Well, if we could use Woodthorpe as an example, and you mentioned the helicopters were having difficulties getting in there, what will it take to evacuate that community given that roads are cut off and air transport is somewhat limited?
We need the weather to ease. The advice from the Bureau is that could happen overnight, and we've got pilots and helicopters ready to go in and do that work. We've got the PCYC in Cooktown prepared for people to evacuate to. Fortunately, everyone in town has currently got themselves to higher ground. We had a very distressing situation last night where there was a group of people who had to spend the whole night on the roof of the hospital, but fortunately the floodwaters receded and they were able to get to high ground too.
You mentioned that the weather system's moving north and the floodwaters seem to have thankfully subsided around Cairns. How far through this crisis are we? Are there towns further up the coast who are still to face the worst of this?
There are, but we also need to get in and do a proper damage assessment of exactly what's happened around Cairns and the northern beaches, up into Douglas and Cooktown, and in more remote places, as we say, like Woodthorpe and Dagara. So there's a lot to be done yet to work out exactly what the impact has been. Last night was frantic, frankly. Hundreds of people rescued off roofs in Cairns northern beaches.
It's obviously much too early to make an assessment about infrastructure as such, but there have been a lot of rumours circulating on social media. Can you tell us what the status of the dams in the area is?
So the dams are safe. The advice to us at this stage, we've been very concerned about water supply, particularly for Cairns, but the technicians there have been able to get the water treatment plant operating again, and it's running at around demand levels with clean water. So that's a really good outcome there in Cairns. But across some of the other more remote and smaller communities, we've been really concerned about electricity, water, sewerage, telecommunications. In some cases, they've been without some of those services for up to a week.
This is your first appearance on 7:30 as Premier, and if I could just ask you a few questions not immediately related to the floods. You seem to be taking over as Premier in an era of crisis, and I noticed that after you announced your ministry yesterday, that you went to Musgrave Park in Brisbane, where a lot of people who are doing it really tough are basing themselves, and you spoke near a portable laundry service for the homeless. Does this reflect the fact that housing is just a massive crisis now in Queensland, whether it's in Brisbane or out in the regions?
Housing is a massive issue in Queensland right now. We've, post-COVID, seen a real surge in our population at the same time as it's been really hard to get construction underway. So even though we have developments approved, it's very hard to make it for developers to make investment decisions to stack up and to get builders. And so that's constraining supply at both ends. And what that means is those who are vulnerable at the lower end of the market are getting priced out and forced into unsuitable accommodation. They're sleeping in some cases, sleeping in cars or in tents or couch surfing. I thought it was really important that the Housing Minister and I went and talked to some of those folk and hear from them just exactly what's happened in their lives. That was very grounding for me. I also spent some time with the services though, who are there every single day, making sure people have health supports and everything else they need, as well as working with them to get crisis and then longer term accommodation. Those services do a really great job.
The state has traditionally had a pretty big role in providing things like housing in Queensland, and a lot of that was privatised, I think, during the Campbell-Newman era. Given the state of the crisis, would it help at all for the state government to be taking a more direct role in trying to rebuild housing stock? I know, for example, you've been buying hotels to help ease the housing crisis.
Yeah, that's right. That's what we need to do. So we're buying hotels. We're also purchasing off the market properties that are coming out of the National Rental Affordability Scheme to make sure that they stay affordable. We've got billions of dollars allocated to that, as well as building new homes, but we have the same problems the private sector does, getting construction underway in a very, very tight labour market. There are supply chain issues. There are all those other challenges that I talked about earlier. And so that's one of the reasons we've moved our Public Works Department, our building agency, into our housing department, so that where we can and where we have to, we can do that building ourselves. We can train the apprentices ourselves. We can use tradies employed by the government to build the houses that we need. So we really need to do everything we can. We need more of everything. Which
is only going to become harder, I presume, now with the disaster cleanup in the north.
Well, that was so certainly the Brisbane floods were a trigger for the problems that we're currently having in the southeast. They took a lot of houses out of our stock, and we're about to see that happen now in the far north. You're right.
Your predecessor unveiled a huge cost of living package in the last budget to subsidise electricity bills. Is there more you can do to help households in the period ahead, or is that something for the federal government now?
Inflation is a national problem, in fact a global problem, and obviously the Australian government has the most levers to pull when it comes to that, but we believe it's important for the states to look for what opportunities we have to ease those pressures on families. Here in Queensland we still own our electricity assets, which gives us a dividend that we're able to give back to Queenslanders, and that's what we use to pay for those energy rebates. There were quarters this year where many Queensland households didn't get a bill at all because our rebates were greater than their bill. We'll look to keep using the strength of our balance sheet and the strength of our state-owned energy assets to keep helping people, but we'll also look for other ways. We've made TAFE free, we've made kindy free, we froze Rego for another year so that it won't go up next year. There are all the kinds of things we're looking to do to make, to just help families where we can.
Polling shows the main concern of voters in your state is crime, and the state government has been heavily criticised for its response. Have you got a plan to fix this?
We do. So in part with the announcements I made about our ministry, we've really focused our ministry on what we know Queenslanders want our priorities to be. And so we've done two things today. I've announced two things today. First of all, I've taken all of the other responsibilities off the Police Minister and made him the Minister for Police and Community Safety. So that's a chance to really focus in on the police's efforts to keep the community safe. But then we also want to do more on prevention, more on early intervention, more on stopping particularly young people getting into a life of crime, and that's why I've put the youth justice portfolio with the education portfolio. What we know, what the experts tell us, is if we can stop young people from getting disengaged at school, we can stop them turning into criminals, and that's a better outcome for victims of crime, a better outcome for the budget, but more importantly, a better outcome for those young people. It gives them a real chance at life.
Well, finally, your first announcement as Premier was about a climate target, an emissions reduction target. Climate is a central subject close to your heart. The state government is now got a target for emissions reduction almost twice the federal target. Should the national target be higher?
Oh, look, I think for 2035 we will see higher national targets. Most of the states now have them, and that makes it easier for the Australian government to do it. But what we've really said is that decarbonising is key to how we protect our blue-collar regional industries and how we attract more. And for too long, it's been characterised as an issue of division or conflict between the inner city and the regions, when really reducing our emissions is the best way we can protect industrial jobs in regional Queensland.
Steven Miles, thanks so much for your time tonight.
Thank you, Laura.
To keep up with the latest information on emergencies in the area, tune into ABC Local Radio or visit our website abc.net.au/emergency.